Us again. So we're on a break. You probably knew this from last week.
What do you mean us?
It's us again. It's the boys. We're on a bit of a break. We're, sunning ourselves, in my case, in the very north of the world, and in William's case, slightly more south. Oh, no, the other way around.
Yeah, no, my son is just on the anus.
Just on the anus?
Yeah, that's where
I'm getting my
son. Yes.
Me too. I'm doing it now. I've got a sunray lamp on. So we delved into the archives because we thought we can't leave you high and dry with nothing, and you probably haven't gone back as far as we went. So there's an episode that we really enjoyed. Well, I did. Domesticating the fox.
Oh.
Classic. Probably more interesting than it sounds. So we did this back towards the end of 2019, and we had a guest. We had a live audience. It was in the before times. And we learned a bunch of interesting things, including how some people thought you could educate plants to turn them into other plants. The one that stuck in my head was educating rye into wheat. So you sit them at the back of the class and shout until they change.
That would be better if you could.
I think it's fabulous. And also problems with bourgeoisie scientific results. These results are far too bourgeois, so they cannot be true. That's not a very good Russian accent, but you'll hear many of those in that. Also, a little comment about cats running dog software. Those are my highlights, but there were many more in this one.
We'll be back with fresh episodes at the end of January. In the meantime, enjoy. Sometime in the 1930s, a district party conference was underway in Moscow province.
They're the best parties.
It was presided over by a new secretary of the district party committee, replacing one who had been recently arrested. At the conclusion of the conference, a tribute to Comrade Stalin was called for. Everyone stood up. And the small hall echoed with stormy applause, rising to an ovation. Everyone was clapping and clapping. It kept going for a minute, and then for 2 minutes, and then for 3 minutes, for 4 minutes, for 5 minutes.
Are you going to count the whole episode? Is this how it's going to run?
The stormy applause continued. Palms were getting sore and raised arms were already aching, and the older people were panting from exhaustion. It was becoming insufferably silly, even those who really adored Stalin. But
I got to know something. Is this what happens when you get old? You pant from exhaustion.
If you're clapping for 6 minutes, I think you do.
Can we get someone to step out and test that for us? We want you to time it.
What is your longest clap period?
9 minutes.
But the problem, who would be the first to stop? The secretary of the district party committee could have done it. He was standing on the platform, and it was he who had just called for the ovation, but he was a newcomer. He'd taken the place of a man who had been arrested, so he was a little bit worried.
Racist?
Arrested? No. Oh. After all of the secret police were standing in the hall, applauding along, but also watching to see who would quit first. And in that obscure small hall, unknown to the leader sitting somewhere else, the applause went on. 6, 7, 8 minutes. At the rear of the hall, a couple of them could cheat. They could clap a little bit less hard, but the ones up the front, sitting on the front, they had to keep cheering for Comrade Stalin. The director of the local paper factory, he was an independent and strong-minded man. He stood up there with the presidium. Aware of all of the falsity, he still kept applauding. Then, after 11 minutes of clapping, the director of the paper factory assumed a business-like expression and sat down in his seat.
Shoot him straight away?
Yeah. Well, miracle. Where there was universal, uninhibited, indescribable enthusiasm for Comrade Stalin, to a man, everyone sat down and stopped cheering straight away. They'd been saved. The squirrel had been smart enough to jump off his revolving wheel. The secret police, of course, were very happy with the event.
Were they though? Because it stopped.
11 minutes of clapping, but more importantly, it was how they could discover who the independent people were and how they could go about eliminating them.
Clapping as a social filter, that makes sense.
The people clapping were right to be afraid. That same night, the director of the paper factory was arrested. They put 10 years on jail for him on the pretext of something different. But after he signed Form 206, which is his arrest warrant, the final document of his interrogation, his interrogator reminded him, don't ever be the first to stop applauding. Welcome to The Wholesome Show, the science-loving podcast.
Well, we're still working it out.
We love them.
We're fond of them.
We're having an affair with science. Podcast for people who sit up the back of the classroom.
Where we ask and say the dumb things and the dumb questions. So you, dear listener, do not have to. We're taking one for the team.
I'm Will Grant.
I'm Dr. Roderick Griffin-Lamberts, and you know what I have to announce today, Will? This involves you.
What is it?
You know how the Nobel Prize comes up with a new category every year? Yeah, it's a thing.
You can't just add a new...
Starting 2019, every year they add a new category, and the Wholesome Show has just won the first Nobel Prize for science communication. I know you didn't know. I thought you'd be happier.
That's great. You're splitting the award with me.
No, I didn't say that. I'm just saying it involves you. I'm taking the money.
And we are joined today by...
Hannah Carl.
Welcome, Hannah. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, because Hannah is from the Research School of Biology here at ANU. So normally the podcast is brought to you by the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science.
And conducted in a very small windowless room.
But today it is not in a small windowless room. It's in a beautiful room here.
With the blinds down, mind you.
With the blinds down. That's true.
Well, at the Research School of Biology where it's lunchtime and it's podcast time.
Yeah, and there are about, 940 people in the room too, which is pretty impressive.
All of the Research School of Biology.
No pressure on you, Hannah, though.
So, Hannah, there is one thing that I'm going to ask of you. I am dumb about biology, but I'm going to attempt to tell a little bit of biology in here. And you're going to help me with the bits where I stuff it all up.
Yeah, look, we'll pull you up at every turn. It'll be fine.
I'm going to pull you up on things whether they're right or not.
Good. Let's get going.
I don't know if they're right.
17th of July, 1917.
Not biology?
No, that's a date. Dmitry Belyaev was born in the town of Protosovo, Kostroma province, Russia.
That's pretty
Protosovo?
Protosovo.
Protosovo?
Protosovo.
Protosovo.
Yeah, probably.
Protosovo.
I looked it up and I think that it's written different in Russian, so it's probably different again. Never mind. The fourth son of a rural priest, the young Belyaev grew up in a time of enormous social upheaval. Over the years, in his schooling period, he'd be shipped from one relative to another.
Wait, what year are we in? 18-something?
1917 he was born, so...
Oh.
Yeah.
So relaxing time in Russia?
Yes, it was. It was not a relaxing time.
No.
So there was a revolution, 1917. By the time he's 10, the country has been through much war, much civil war, and things were not as they were. And being the son of a rural priest was not a great thing.
Yeah, religion went well after that, didn't it?
Yeah. In 1927, at the age of 10, young Dmitry was sent to live with his older brother Nikolai in Moscow. Nikolai was 18 years older.
I got to say, too, this is straight from the Russian first name handbook, isn't it?
Nikolai and Dmitry.
Nikolai, have we got a Yuri?
There's no Yuris, but there are actually a couple of Dmitrys.
Of course there are. They ran out of names in 1917. There's only like 6 of them.
There is a Nina and Ludmilla.
Ludmilla, that's my favourite. Svetlana's right up there too, actually.
We don't have a... Oh, no, there is a Svetlana.
Yeah?
In fact, I think
Is it really?
Not my first Russian story.
There is a Svetlana. That's great. You know this one already.
Yes. I know biology.
Now, Nikolai was 18 years older than his brother. So he was off working. He was 28 years at the time. Nikolai was studying at the Koltsov Institute for Experimental Biology.
Here we go.
Yeah, there we go.
What could possibly go wrong?
Working in the laboratory of Sergei Chetverikov. There's a Sergei for you. There's another.
What was the surname again? Just for the people at the back?
Chetverikov.
Chetverikov?
I think I did okay.
Da, very good, very good. Dobro.
Who was at the time one of the country's most respected and well-known geneticists. Chetverikhov's lab was producing many of the country's finest scientists.
Has anyone in this room actually heard of that name?
Chetverikov?
And you call yourselves biologists.
That's good. I've found an obscure story. That's great.
I don't know. They're not worth it. They haven't even heard of Kritzvilovich.
There's no test. There's no test. That lab was producing many of the best biologists in the country at the time. Nikolai was a favoured protege, and he was seen by many in the research community as one of the leaders of the next era of Russian genetics.
What was the first era? I hate to think.
Was there? I'm sure there was a good era.
Are you an expert in the history of Russian genetics by any chance?
No.
No, good answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Dmitry idolised his older brother. So Dmitry would help, as a 10-year-old, help Nikolai catalogue his butterfly specimens. Nikolai was working on butterflies and silkworms, and he would help to catalogue them, while Nikolai explained how these delicate creatures might help geneticists unravel such wonders as metamorphosis. Every Wednesday...
To be fair, how many creatures could help you with that? Like, we're going to try it on horses. Nothing. Went try it on birds, nothing.
Chrysalis of a horse? No. Okay, yeah, there are.
Like what? You use one of the
No,
few
but hang
animals?
on. There is something that they do. I don't know. I study plants, so I don't really know anything about this. But there is
That's
something
perfect.
about butterflies' wing formation that's controlled by lots and lots of genes. So if anything is going wrong in a genome, like if there's some little mutation, then the wings don't form properly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why they're good.
And do they say caterpillars or something? Or
One wing. Helicopters.
all right, well, we might get to some of that. We might get to some of that.
All right,
Not on butterflies, but we'll get to something
So
similar.
back to horses.
on.
Every Wednesday, the members of the Chetverikov lab would have their director's seminar, where they would meet.
Not dissimilar.
Yeah, not dissimilar.
Yeah.
Where they would meet for tea and discuss the most recent findings. Nikolai took his younger brother Dmitry to many of these meetings. The younger brother would sit in the back.
18 years younger brother.
Yeah, well, I think.
Do you want to come to work with me? No! I just really don't. The tea's shit, the sandwiches are awful, and you're boring.
It's free sandwiches. That's why people turn up to these seminars.
When you're a kid, all food is free.
That's true. It was during a time of upheaval. Anyway, but anyway, the younger Dmitry, he'd sit in the back and he'd be fascinated by the unbridled passion of the debates, which featured a great deal of yelling, leading Dmitry to refer to them around the house at the time as the yelling meetings. But unfortunately, the times were not in Nikolai's favour. In 1935, Trofim, which is not a famous Russian name, Trofim Denisovich Lysenko, had risen to the top of Soviet biological and agricultural science. Director of the All-Union Selection and Genetics Institute at Odessa.
Oh, they're popular, yeah.
Director of the Institute of Genetics of the Academy of Sciences of the Soviet Union. And president of the Vladimir Lenin All-Union Academy of Agricultural Sciences. At heart, Lysenko rejected what people in this room or people back in 1930 in many other countries was mainstream biology. The mainstream biology that Nikolai Belyaev followed, also Chetverikov, but also Mendel and Darwin. He rejected all of this.
Do you mean evolution?
Yes. He liked... Yeah.
Small issue with your pedigree there, Lysenko.
Instead of evolution, he preferred the idea that plants... probably animals, but he focused on plants, could be educated.
Oh, wow.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Just like humans, do you just sit them down, line them up?
Yeah.
In school.
Shut up. Listen. You'll get water at little lunch.
Look, Lysenko had one or two ideas that were close to okay.
We're looking forward to hearing them.
That's why he's the director of only 4 national institutions.
Well, no, he was quite decent on animal ethics later on. Like he because of his idea that animals could be educated, he said that you should look after animals and be nice to them, not just beat them mercilessly. But
No, beat them mercifully.
we are not here to talk about Lysenko's good bits. Lysenko is a baddie.
Is this the name of the episode? Lysenko's bad bits?
No, not at all.
Lysenko's good bits. Either way.
Either way,
Anyway.
you have my attention.
Lysenko would claim, for instance, that rye could be educated into wheat, and wheat could be... Well, I take it that laugh means that's not true.
No, it's just brilliant. I think that was everyone's thinking right now, why hadn't we thought of this before?
But as well as rye could be educated into wheat could be educated into barley, which must be like a postgraduate.
Barley into dogs into... yeah.
Weeds could be educated into
Cannabis.
food grains, something like that.
Yeah.
For Lysenko, the environment alone shapes plants and animals. Put them in the proper setting and expose them to the right stimuli, and you can remake them to an almost infinite degree.
So he could turn base rye into gold?
A little bit, yeah. He's
Try
like
hard enough?
an agricultural alchemist, but it never worked.
It's a bit water into wine, isn't it?
It's a lot water into wine. The problem was...
It didn't work.
It didn't work. But...
I've ruined the story.
No, that's not the story. People in power believed that it worked. You know, the idea, of course, it's dumb. You all know it's dumb.
Yeah, but it would be useful if it did work. Therefore,
Promising.
yeah, it must work.
Thing is, Lysenko was in power, and he used his power to make the dumb terrible. So in one famous speech in the 1930s...
That's his family crest, I think.
Lysenko compared his opponents in biology to the peasants who still resisted the Soviet government's collectivization strategy, saying that by opposing his theories, the traditional geneticists were setting themselves against Marxism. Stalin, who happened to be in the audience of this biological conference, was the first one to stand up and applaud, calling out, "Bravo!"
That's because one of his henchmen woke him up suddenly and he was surprised.
But bravo, Comrade Lysenko, bravo. And as we all know, everyone cheered along. So Lysenko used his favor with Stalin to fire specialists throughout the Soviet agricultural science system. He used his position to denounce biologists as fly lovers and people haters.
Just look around the room briefly. A few people looking at the floor there.
They're all
We
like-
don't get into it.
Fly lovers, fair enough. I think that was because they did a lot of their studies on flies, so that he thought they were too focused on that.
Don't suck up to them.
And he decried the wreckers in biology who he claimed were trying to purposely disable the Soviet economy. Eventually,
By finding facts out.
the Academy of Agricultural Sciences in the Soviet Union announced that Lysenkoism would be taught as the only correct theory, and genetics was officially declared a bourgeois pseudoscience.
It's always a good sign when you add ism to the end and make it a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know, right?
Thingism?
Yeah, I mean, that could be it.
It could. Thingism, I think, is going to take off. So it's bourgeois pseudoscience.
Fly loverism.
Bourgeois pseudoscience for fly lovers.
What is it? Lysenkoism.
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 Lysenkoism. Lysenko's the baddie. Lysenkoism is the bad thing.
Don't ruin it. We don't know. He might turn out good.
He doesn't.
You come to
He
Jesus
doesn't.
moment.
He doesn't turn out good. Now, Nikolai, the older brother, Nikolai Belyaev, his research on silkworm genetics had produced some important results.
that were bourgeois and therefore should be ignored.
Yes.
Yes, okay,
they
good.
were declared bourgeois results that should be ignored. But we won't get to that just yet. I'll tell you where he'd got to at this point.
I do love the idea that you get rich people results. These results are for the wealthy and the aristocrats, therefore they must be garbage.
Yeah, well, there's some
It's just,
journals for science for wealthy and
Yeah, and the facts differ. Physics is different for rich people as well, I'm sure.
yes. Look, I think they did have a problem here. That was the big problem.
What was the red flag?
Nikolai. He'd been appointed head of a government-funded institute in Tbilisi, a place where he could do both good research, but also contribute to an important the silkworm industry for the Soviet Union. So it was agricultural science, and he was doing good things.
I'm really surprised that they're big on silkworms in Russia.
Yeah.
Because,
Soviet silk, you don't have any?
I mean, don't you wear fur or something? It's a bit cold for
Look,
silk.
I do,
silk
but
chamois
Soviet silk can be quite warming.
Yeah, I think fur. We'll come to fur.
Okay.
We'll come to fur.
Okay.
We'll come to fur. Don't worry. Fur is coming. But during a trip to Moscow to visit some friends and family in the fall of 1937, Nikolai was warned that arrests of his geneticist colleagues had begun back in Tbilisi. In spite of the danger, he went back for his wife and his 12-year-old son.
Rookie mistake. You got to cut your losses in this situation.
Yeah.
I'm no expert on the Soviet Union, but I've seen a few movies, and that kind of behaviour doesn't go down well.
It didn't.
You've seen the X-Men, right? Didn't go well for, what's his name, Magneto.
No,
it's the same thing,
go
right?
well. It's yeah.
World War Z, there's many examples.
The family never heard from Nikolai or his wife or his son again.
I'm shocked.
Dmitry, 20 years old at the time, commenced a lifelong quest to repudiate Lysenko. And that's the story that I want to tell today.
About time, Jesus Christ.
I really didn't want to say that.
But
we got like 8 minutes left, and everyone's trying to claw at the door. Luckily, we locked it.
Dmitry had hopes of following his brother's academic path, but he was sent to live with his older sister Olga and her family in Moscow.
There's an Olga. I forgot Olga.
Because they were struggling to make ends meet, Dmitry couldn't go to a biological school where he wanted to, and instead he was enrolled in a 7-year vocational program to become an electrician.
Fix tractors.
But he switched and found, and he did try and apply for admission to Moscow State University, but the university no longer admitted the sons of priests, so he was denied there. But
Wow.
he did find a route into trade.
romantic.
He found a route into trade college, and he enrolled at the Ivanova State Agricultural Academy. So everyone's doing agricultural science at the time. At least he could study biology at the agricultural school.
Ish.
And yes, ish, but still. And many top-notch scientists would visit and give lectures on the newest advances in genetics. So he still got a little bit of what he wanted.
Like, actually the newest advances in genetics or the Stalin version?
Yeah.
Lenin, sorry, my apologies, Jesus.
Yeah, probably a bit more of the Stalin-y, Lenin-y, Lysenko version.
Yeah.
Anyway, he graduated from college in 1939 and secured a job as a senior lab technician at the Central Research Laboratory.
How's the timing?
On?
Bright new future, 1939. I'm in Russia. I've got my degree. I'm ready to go out and face the world. Bombs drop.
Yeah, there was a
Game
pause.
over.
But anyway, at the Central Research Laboratory on fur breeding animals in Moscow.
How did you
There
know?
we
Good
go.
guess,
You
Hannah.
do know this story.
His job would be to breed silver foxes with beautiful fur for sale overseas. I mean, they'd use them in Russia as well.
Okay, yeah, good. They
not
just
just-
keep the silk for Russia and send the fur overseas.
Tougher now, tougher.
The Russians,
Everyone in
that's how
silk.
they transport it to the docks. They can wear it to the docks, but then they have to sacrifice the fur to sell to
This is why
other
they're
people.
clapping for 11 minutes. They're just trying to stay warm.
That's it. I just want to survive.
This would be critical importance to the Soviet government because furs were quite valuable and could sell internationally, and international currency was something that the Soviet government needed a lot of at the time.
Yeah, actual currency.
But it also offered him an opportunity, a chance to repudiate Lysenko in secret. But before he could start his plan, as you guessed, Rod, the war got in the way.
Oh, it wasn't really a guess. I think a lot of people know that one.
1941, Belyaev joined the Soviet army, was wounded and received several military decorations. He went from the rank...
Which really replaces a leg and an arm, doesn't it?
No, he didn't lose any legs and arms. He went from rank and file soldier to major. He was the senior assistant to the chief of the chemical department of the 4th Shock Army. But
Yeah.
they liked him in the army. He did really well out of the army, but that's not what we're here
The
to.
4th Shock Army.
After the yeah, I like the name of that.
4th Shock Army. How many were there?
I don't know. At
The
least-
first
at
three
least
didn't do so well.
Not too shocking. After that, he went back to his laboratory on fur breeding animals. So,
fair enough.
returning to fox breeding, he dived into breeding to make ever more beautiful coats. And thinking about how the foxes lived on the fox farms, he began to look at the foxes that he was breeding. They were like dogs, but not like dogs. And he started thinking, how's
How's that possible?
how had wolves turned into domesticated dogs, and why not foxes? In fact,
Why don't foxes turn into domesticated dogs?
yeah, why hadn't foxes domesticated?
Aren't they cats?
No. No.
I was going to say,
Hannah,
I'm seeing a flaw in the plan. there.
I know some biology.
Look, I've got no idea, so I'm just going to say they're cats.
You're a plant person. You should know. Yeah, foxes are cats.
I'm putting foxes closer to wolves, and in fact, I've got the story here that says
I've got the Wikipedia entry to prove it.
foxes are wolfish. They are in the canine family.
Cats.
As Donald Trump has said lately, I have a canine. I call him a dog.
Is that Baron?
Yeah.
Different podcast.
But he wondered, why had wolves turned into dogs, but not foxes? In fact, how had domestication itself first started? He had a few other questions about the whole process of domestication.
So he invented a time machine and back he went. This is the true story.
Yeah, this is the true story. He escaped Soviet Russia with time machine. No, he didn't. He asked himself a few things. Why had wolves domesticated? Why had so few species? In fact, there was only a few dozen domesticated at all. So there's millions of species out there, only a few dozen, mostly mammals, but there are a few other things like a few fish, a few birds, a few insects. Why had they domesticated?
What's a domesticated fish relationship look like?
That's something I can't tell you right now.
Bringing my trout with me. It follows me as long as I walk along the edge of the lake. God, he's loyal.
You have to have a lead.
Loves a bit of
lead-
bread.
I'm thinking of pets, not food.
Isn't that domestic though?
Food's like if you domesticate something to
Oh,
eat
cow.
it, that counts. Yeah.
I suppose so.
It's not just pets.
So what it means is just put a cage around it, which means, again, this is a thin thing. You can put a cage around anything.
No, but also
Except your heart, man.
there's a few things about domestication. It's their reaction to humans. And yes, some of the high end is you can walk them on a lead and they'll come when you call, things like that. Cows, I don't think come when you call. I don't know.
They love a lead though.
They love a lead. I'm
There's
sure they do.
there's a guy down by the lake who walks his cow. Actually, there was a guy who used to walk his alpaca, and he put it in the back of his car, and he had a tiny little car, and the neck would stick out 3 feet above the roof of the car.
Is that true?
That's true.
Everyone sees it the first time they arrive in Canberra. And weirdly, he lives in my street now.
I was walking down the street in this same suburb, and in the distance I went, that is the weirdest looking fucking dog I've seen in my life. And I'm getting closer and closer thinking these glasses aren't working, and because its head's all out of shape and the neck's like this.
I think
It's a dude walking an alpaca on a leash.
I think what you need to get a dog into an alpaca is you have to educate it. You have to...
That's it. Stretch. Just stretch. Make your head smaller.
So he had a few questions.
Not
Why-
related to Lysenko, that's fair. No, that's fair.
Why had so few species domesticated, and what was it about those species? Why had a few other things changed when those species had domesticated? So dogs don't look like wolves 100% anymore. Cows don't look like
Wolves anymore. No. That's true.
whatever was
This is
before.
weird.
They developed, spots and patches and different sorts of colouring. They'd retained different sorts of physical characteristics, and they all seemed to be a little bit more childlike in terms of, looking more like puppies or kittens than their wild friends. Friends? Forebears. That's the one I was looking
Cousins.
for. And he asked himself, why would these characteristics have been selected for by the breeders? Farmers were raising cows, after all, had nothing to gain from their cows having black and white spotted hides.
You could tell them apart from other people's cows.
Maybe. Pig farmers, why would you care about the pig having a curly tail? You wouldn't select for it to have a curly tail.
No.
Finally, there was one more thing about domesticated animals that was pretty useful to him as a fur breeder.
They don't attack you every time you look at them?
Okay, two more things. One was that they don't attack you every time you look at them.
Nice puppy. Ah, that's not useful. That's not going to help.
The second was that they could have babies, a lot more. They would have more babies.
Really?
And they could do it any time of the year. So typically wild animals like to have a baby at a special time of the year.
Special time?
When the baby is most likely to... Yeah, they have special time first. And then the baby comes out, and usually they want to have them at the best time of year for that baby to survive.
Yeah, for college entry.
Spring and shit like that.
And less of them.
Yes, and less of them. So domesticated animals, in general, can have more litters per...
It's always a good time of year for a domesticated animal.
Per flock of litter. And it's always a good time of year. They're happy with that.
Just living like kings.
Yeah, living like
Okay.
And so if you're a fox breeder, then these are things that actually...
I'm sure there's a few listening.
These actually look good. Yeah, and sure.
We're big in that community.
So, Dmitry set out to find out. Now... He was at the Central Research Laboratory on fur breeding animals. He was in a perfect position to conduct the experiment he had in mind. This would be useful to him as an industrial scientist, helping to have more fox babies. They would be calmer in the fox farms.
And they could run machines?
But also, maybe they could run machines.
What's the industry part?
Like growing foxes.
Skinning them.
Yes.
They're the industry.
Oh, that's
Skinning
it.
them.
I was taken to the machine shop kind of place, and it didn't seem likely. That's a lot of education.
But also, he could answer some interesting questions about real science, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to get back at Lysenko. His hunch was simple, that the answer to domestication rested in their tameness. So, he commenced doing a pilot...
Can I ask, though, isn't that actually part of the definition of domestication?
Yes.
Yeah. The answer to their domestication is their tameness. Yes, it's in the definition, mate.
At the point, but maybe it hadn't been defined at the
Oh, they hadn't
time.
done it yet?
Like he hadn't
Might have been up
invented
to him.
it.
Okay.
We're at the front of the wave here.
Yeah, that's true.
Point
That's
of
true.
order on that one. We'll check that one later. Let's say Hannah's right here.
Hannah's right here.
Happy to take it.
So he
Keep
commenced a pilot project. This one working in Estonia with Nina Sorokina, who was chief breeder at one of the many fox farms that he collaborated with.
And what I love with the Russians is they always have to say both names, so she would always be Nina Sorokina. Come here and tell me what you're doing. Nina Sorokina. Blah, blah, blah.
Dmitry explained to Nina that in his work in fox and mink breeding, he had noted that while most of the minks and foxes on the fur farms were either quite aggressive or were nervous and fearful towards people, a few were calmer when people approached them. They weren't bred to be calm, so that quality must have been part of their natural behaviour. There must have been the natural variation in the population, and so some of them were just calmer. Yeah. This, he suggested, would have been true of the ancestors of all of the other domesticates. All the original wolves, there might have been one calmer one that might have been on this path towards becoming a dog.
But like one would have been better at maths, another one could swim well. I mean, like is that revelatory at this time?
I don't know.
I'm not trying to shit on Dmitry. I'm sure he's a great guy, but
it's not revelatory at the time.
Okay, just checking. I want to know how amazed to be by this man.
I think the thing is he cared and he wanted to follow through on it.
The fact that he cared is always amazing. Yeah. Someone cares, that's good.
So he said, okay, Nina, every year, choose a few of the calmest foxes at breeding time instead of the ones that have just the beautifulest fur and mate them with one another. From the pups of those selected foxes, they should, again, choose the calmest one. The change from the generation to generation might be subtle. You might not be even able to spot anything. But if we just keep going, see what we get, and then we'll see where we get to.
How long's a generation?
1 year. Foxes
that's a shitload longer than snow peas or whatever Mendel used. I mean, that's going to be... that's patience.
A huge part of this is that his experiment was one of the few that was set up with such a long time frame. He thought this might take 100 years to do, but we'll get back at Lysenko eventually.
From beyond the grave, I strike at thee.
But he didn't have an idea of how long this would take because nothing had been done before.
Yeah.
But obviously, a 1 year generation gap is much slower than something you can do in
those fry lovers with their Drosophila. They don't have to wait that long.
So he warned Nina and he said, okay, look, we have to be careful of Lysenko, but we might be signing up for something that's dumb that's going to take ages to do. But Nina jumped at the chance. She was keen as.
She just gets to hang out with foxes. Why wouldn't you?
That's true.
Well, she
And there's
probably-
going to be some spare furs lying around. She's going to throw it out.
She is involved in industrially farming foxes to later brutally murder. I don't know if she later brutally murders them herself,
They have to be brutal.
but she's
Like, couldn't it be pleasantly murdered? Gently euthanized?
let's say 1940s Russia was not the.
The fur tastes better if you beat the animal to death. Is that what it comes down
actually,
to?
There are
Like, people that think that.
Yeah. The fur tastes better if you.
Or not the fur, but the meat.
It's a less stressful fur.
Yeah.
It fits better. It's not as snug.
So Nina got started. She was keen as for this. She would approach the cages and the fox would lunge at them. And some foxes would lunge, some would snarl, some would back away. But out of about a dozen or so of the 100 that she would test each year were slightly less agitated. And they certainly weren't calm, but they were less highly reactive and aggressive. So a few of them would even take food when she would offer it from their hands. So
Dances with Wolves ripped that whole scene off. That whole thing with Kevin Costner getting the wolf in. No Dances with Wolf fans. Come on, it's a classic. Speaks to a generation.
So those were the ones that got to become mummies and daddies. They got to breed, and within 3 generations, three years, Nina was starting to see some intriguing results. They're not enough that you could necessarily publish on, but some of the pups of the foxes they'd selected were a little calmer than their parents and their grandparents.
Kittens.
They would sneer and react aggressively sometimes, but at other times they seemed almost indifferent, enough that they could start saying they look a bit different to the rest of the population. Dmitry was delighted. It was a hint of something, and in much less time than he expected. So this is 3 generations. He needed to go bigger, and the times were starting to change in his favour. So in 1953, Stalin died, and everything in the Soviet Union began to change. Things became a lot more free and open.
Yeah, it's relative though, isn't it?
Belyaev himself, Dmitry, was widely lauded for his stunning results he'd been achieving in breeding beautiful foxes, for their furs. He'd been able to achieve all sorts of different colours like cobalt blue, sapphire, topaz, beige and pearl. But in 1954, Lysenko organised a series of lectures specifically to discredit him. Lysenko's cronies would invite Dmitry up on stage, and they planned that they would ridicule him and denounce him and get him to...
You dress funny. You have weird shoes.
To ridicule the results that he can clearly show, though, what are they saying? They're like, he's secretly educating them in different ways.
Yeah. Topaz isn't a fur colour, idiot.
I don't know.
It's a lesson.
Yeah.
I think they would probably just yell at him, like bourgeois,
imagine that?
bourgeois, get off stage.
Yeah, here are my results. We showed him.
But Dmitry...
That's pretty much like a normal seminar, isn't it, though, around these parts? This is what I've heard.
And this is what I love. Dmitry strode onto stage when he was invited by Lysenko, and he dumped a giant pile of gorgeous fox and mink furs, which he draped over the lectern. As a colleague in the room later recalled, the whole crowd fell utterly silent. My God, his fur is so beautiful. How can we critique this man?
This is beautiful. Also, fur muffled sound, which will help them be silent.
Dmitry began to speak in a deeply resonant voice. Genetics was still an officially prohibited science, but Dmitry...
You're not mimicking his voice right now, eh?
No,
Because that's not very resonant.
I'm not doing his voice. Yeah. But Dmitry pulled no punches in sharing his discoveries about genetics of breeding that he'd been finding. He wasn't afraid of Lysenko anymore, and he was openly defying him. After that, he felt like he could speak openly about his disgust at what Lysenko had done to Soviet science, though he knew other people couldn't do that. Key thing, he got himself a better job.
Keith who?
Key thing. Dmitry gained a new position at the Institute for Cytology and Genetics in Novosibirsk, which is a Soviet city just for doing science.
Beautiful beach town too. Great beaches.
And, no, it's not. It's somewhere...
No, it's inland.
Right in the middle of Siberia. And he could build... famed for beaches in
Artificial waves.
He could build a much bigger farm and do a much bigger experiment. And so he kicked things with his foxes into next gear.
Whoa.
He needed a new collaborator. Nina's done with her breeding.
She's just happy in a pile of foxes now.
She's fine.
No
She's fine. She's got some slightly happier foxes and a whole pile of furs. And he got Ludmila Trut. Ludmila had trained at Moscow State University.
It's not an attractive name. I'm sorry, but it sounds kind of like a bit imposing.
She can't help. that.
Ludmilla.
She can't help that.
It's hard to say it lightly.
Ludmilla is the hero in this story. So
I didn't say I don't like her. I think she's fabulous.
Ludmilla had interestingly trained at the lab where Pavlov, as in Ivan Pavlov, discovered Pavlovian conditioning. I don't think he called it Pavlovian conditioning.
Yeah, a bit arrogant.
What is that?
That's where you ring the bell and the dog gets really hungry and slobbers and stuff like that.
Ah.
Yeah,
You know the drill. I can go into great length if you wanted to describe that.
key result in psychology, but also
So no?
Dribbling.
also something where she knew that conditioning animals by could get them to do different things. You
Yes.
could train them.
Okay.
So something that she was a little bit wary about.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dmitry proposed to Ludmilla that he wanted to set up a farm.
Oh, I should have paused there.
And
Was it
he
a nice wedding?
No. And he wanted to see how far they could go with selecting for the foxes. So Ludmilla dived in and they set up a farm first about 200 miles from Novosibirsk, and then eventually they set up a new farm right next door to the lab where they could watch these foxes all the time. So she would visit the foxes 4 times a year, seeing how calm they were, and then watching them mate, and then seeing what the puppies were like, and then choosing the next calm ones.
Watching them, mate. Was this critical? Or is that more of a perk?
You have to see that it's done. Like
I think you can tell pretty soon after.
I guess so. Yes, it's a perk.
Could have had a lab assistant do that, I'm thinking.
Okay, things got moving. So she'd borrowed a couple of foxes from the original pilot, but she got some new foxes as well and caught some as well, just to mix the population up. So, as well as what she noticed straight away is that after about 3rd generation, you could pick them up and they wouldn't fight so much. So things were getting a little bit there.
Geez, those early tests would have been dodgy though, wouldn't they? Let's see if we can pick
them
this
up.
one up.
Can I ask a point of
Yes.
clarification?
Yeah.
Do foxes like parent their kids, or is it just they pop them out and so all we're seeing is effects of genetics?
Cool.
Ooh,
Yes,
you must do science. That's a good question, actually.
They raise the puppies in a den until the puppies, I think, are about 45 days old.
They're kittens.
No, they're puppies. They're puppies. They're of the dog sort of species. And after that, the puppies go out on their own. So they're a solo animal mostly. Most of their lives, adulthood, they're solo.
So they reach maturity in a year, but they're only with their parents for 45 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
cool.
you can correct me on that later, but it's something like that.
It's a shocking result in science. A bit of nature and a bit of nurture. We'd never come across that before, though.
So they started producing slightly larger litters, which was a good thing, and their fertility window seemed to be a little bit wider, a little bit longer in time.
You can't
and
give me
also-
euphemisms like that. Carry on.
Yeah. Stop it.
No?
Okay, April 1963, they had a bit of an interesting breakthrough. So the 4th generation of the pups. Just a few weeks old, Ludmilla walked to the pen of one, and one little male pup named Ember began vigorously waving his tail at her.
Oh, that's so cute.
Foxes will wag their tails at each other.
In anger.
When they're
Like cats do.
not in anger. They had never before done this to humans. He was the only one in his litter that was doing this. And as Ludmilla had trained in Pavlov's lab, she was, she wanted to check, is this a behavioral thing that we've encouraged or something like that? Yeah. But until that point, dogs were the only animals that had ever done this. So she monitored over the next few weeks. But it was something that Dmitry could take to the International Congress on Genetics in the Netherlands in 1963, and he was starting to get a lot of interest in this story. Generation 5 rolled around. No big new changes. Generation 6, there were. The pups would press up against the bars of the pens when Ludmilla approached, trying to nuzzle up against her and roll over on their backs to show their tummies when to be rubbed. They would also lick her hands. When she would walk...
Is this affection or terror?
No, it's affection.
Okay.
It's affection. When she would walk away from them, they'd whine. These were all brand new behaviours that they had never seen in foxes towards humans. So some of these behaviours they will show to each other, but never towards humans. It became harder and harder for Ludmilla at this point to walk away from them, which...
Softy.
Well, yeah, it becomes really interesting later on. Now, at this
I'm
point...
seeing the fur trade taking a plummet if you overdo this, huh?
Yeah, I think there's a big problem here.
Yeah.
At this point, they established a classification system. So class 3 is basically the same as a normal population. So wild animals, basically.
Yeah.
Class 2 was a bit better. Class 1, and then Class 1E, or the elite. Main thing, in Generation 6, 1.8% they classed as elite. So they were showing these affectionate sorts of behaviours towards people.
Elite. What a descriptor.
One generation later, 10% were what they called elite.
One generation.
One generation. So
multiplied by 10.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
In generation 8, they finally got more, and so this is 8 years. So they've only been doing this experiment for 8 years at this point. More tail waggers started to appear, confirming that Ember was not unique and that tail wagging to humans was heritable. Some had curly tails. They were also opening their eyes earlier, and it seemed the adults were continuing the puppy behaviours, so playing with things like that, for much longer.
But what about the ones who didn't? Did they not like each other?
They weren't selected for, and they were.
So they just didn't appear anymore.
Yeah, they were turned into fur coats. I think.
Does this tell us too that if we had everything we needed, we'd never grow up? Like we just keep
Worked for me.
running.
I work at a
No,
uni.
that's true. Okay, generation 9. Foxes would gaze into people's eyes, which
Super rare.
super rare. And there's a great study where someone compared gazing into dogs' eyes and gazing into wolves' eyes, which means that some research. I think
One's a lot quicker than the other.
I think some researchers in Japan did this. Not connected with this at all, but their job was to gaze into.
Try and survive.
I don't know how long.
Make it look natural and affectionate, but also get ready to sprint at top speed at any moment. That's terrible.
Interesting.
Terrible.
Interesting.
Terrifyingly
thing.
bad.
The researchers began to realize the tamest foxes were having a powerful emotional effect on the people. So there's a great story of some big famous gruff army general, like a Soviet war hero, who came to visit the farm, and he found this little fox puppy, and he's like, "Oh,
Now, my baby.
you're so adorable, you're beautiful," and he's sitting
You
there.
will be special hat. Best hat. Elite hat. He's a softie. He's no longer a general.
Generation 10 came floppy ears and a change in the colouring, particularly in the forehead. So they got piebald colouring, and they'd started
What?
to
Sorry?
in the forehead.
Piebald colouring.
Yeah.
Are you going to say that's wrong?
What is that?
It's like splotches, big splotches,
Oh,
big
okay.
splotches of white horse, like a piebald horse.
Like, it's basically shittier fur coat because it's all blotchy. Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
So not so good.
do you know what it's a lot like? Tabby cat.
Tabby cat. There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, that's good. There.
Yeah.
But they'd also, which is an interesting thing of domestication, dogs get it, cows get it, horses get it, white star in their forehead.
Whoa. I think there's something else going on there, though.
Well, no, it's not selected for, but it seems to go, and this is part of Belyaev's theory, which is he called it destabilized selection. A lot of these traits seem to go hand in hand with the selection for tameness. They seem to have been a bundle of things that all
It's
went
as
along
if there are
together.
things that you didn't plan on happening as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Biology, eh?
So Belyaev would show pictures of Mekta, the first fox puppy with floppy ears, in all of his presentations at the time. He'd take it around the Soviet Union, and audiences would just die at the cuteness. At the same time,
Wow. That's a starving audience, though, isn't it?
oh, come on. I'm sure there's lots of cuteness.
Cute puppy. Okay, back to stats. You'll see on this invisible table.
Their snouts began to get more rounded, and the adults continued to have more puppy-like faces for longer periods. Gradually, the puppies began involving the adults and the carers and Ludmilla and the researchers in their play. So they'd be taking things over to them and playing with them. Now, this point, it gets interesting, and Ludmilla
Finally.
decided to mix things up a bit. In one direction, they said, okay, we've selected for tameness. What happens if we select for
Psychosis. I love it.
aggressiveness?
Yeah.
And it went exactly as you can imagine.
Wow.
So they developed some truly, truly, truly aggressive populations of foxes. No one wanted to work with these, except for Natasha.
Because she was a spy
Natasha liked
working with Boris.
like the domesticated foxes, but I love the aggressive foxes. But the foxes would, I looked at one aggressive fox and gazed straight into my eyes but didn't move. Her fox eyes intently followed my every movement. I've slowly brought my palm nearer to the front side of the cage, and she reacted immediately. She threw herself to the front side of the cage, her front paws against the wire mesh.
Keep talking.
She had a really dreadful look, you being Natasha. Yeah.
You're making this hot. I mean, seriously, it sounds like you're reading a different kind of genre right now.
So, yeah, blind fury in these foxes. So,
Okay, that's not so good.
So they did find out they could do this. But the other way that they switched gears is they wanted to throw a little bit of objectivity out the window.
Like all good science.
Like all good science. Screw objectivity. And they said, original domestication, it had involved humans. So it wasn't just the tameness, but humans might have reacted to these new dog things.
So they locked a human family in with the foxes.
Well, kind of, yes.
What?
Ludmilla decided she wanted to emphasize the human connection. So she wanted to give one of the foxes, the experience of living closely with humans like dogs do.
This reminds me of like the LSD experiments with dolphins from
Yes.
the 70s. My
Yes.
head's going to dark
Yeah, and the woman who
places.
lived with the dolphin for 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's exactly
as
the
the
one I'm
dolphin's
thinking of.
spouse. I'm not kidding.
While dosing the pool water with
Yeah,
LSD.
yeah, with LSD. Yeah. The quote was she learnt how to live wet all the time.
Oh my God.
And they had, a
Right,
very
that's not the
close
story.
relationship.
Stop it.
Next week.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that. We'll do that one day. They only lived together. They didn't get any further.
The foxes, you mean?
Yeah, not the dolphin. That was different.
Yeah, the fox.
They
So
went to a dark and or beautiful place. Carry on.
Ludmilla selected one she called Pushinka, a tiny ball of fur, it means. And she knew at this point,
Hello thing I could suck up in a vacuum by accident. Beautiful.
and she knew it was okay to give in and play to their heart's delight. So
yeah.
she'd scientifically justified it. One of the carers actually jumped in front of Ludmilla and said, live with me first. And he took it home for a few weeks.
Jumped in front.
Yeah,
No!
I'll take. Eventually, he would take her for walks on a leash, and she would come when he whistled, which was another first. But then, eventually, Pushinka lived in with Ludmilla, and they experienced a whole bunch of firsts. So the move was traumatic originally. So it took a couple of nights.
For who?
For Pushinka,
Oh.
a couple of nights to get used to her, and she wasn't eating. But then one night, the fourth night, Pushinka quietly jumped up on the bed while Ludmilla slept and curled up beside her. When Ludmilla woke up, Pushinka scooched her up as close to head as possible, placing her face right next to Ludmilla's. And
Aw.
I know,
Delicately
right?
crapping on the bedspread. Like, was it toilet trained?
When Ludmilla put an arm under Pushinka's head, Pushinka rested her two front paws on it, cuddling in like a child in its mother's arms.
Was it toilet trained? I notice you're avoiding that one.
I don't know.
You know, domesticated and toilet trained. Yeah, for me, they're pretty. Kindred spirits.
A while later, Pushinka had her first litter at the age of 1. When Ludmilla arrived back at the house, Pushinka carried one of the puppies over to Ludmilla, like as a present or as a, hey, you go, you're my grandmother.
Eat this.
Or something. I don't know. Ludmilla chastised her and said, look, you've got to look after this thing. But Pushinka began to show all sorts of new behaviors. So jealousy when other foxes played with her humans. She would bark to protect her humans. And seeing Pushinka unhappy was difficult for Ludmilla. And she would bend the rules all the time. The foxes started to display behaviours that lots of dog owners would know and often describe in their dogs. Strong social intelligence, lots of bonding.
Ability to escape through any fence you build.
Possibly, I don't know. Dmitry presented these results at the International Genetics Congress in Moscow in 1978. At that point, he had delivered quite a lot in his rejection of Lysenko. A lifelong smoker, Dmitry Belyaev died of lung cancer in 1985. Ludmilla Trut continued the experiment with a blessing from a range of Soviet and external sources. In 1998, there was a huge problem. The bottom fell out of the Russian economy. And
Again.
a lot of, they got down to Ludmilla was so desperate to somehow stop the foxes from starving that she went out onto the roads nearby around the farm and stopped cars asking people for money or any kind of food they could give.
I thought you were going to say she was so desperate to make money that they killed all the foxes for their fur.
For the fur.
Yes, she killed the aggressive ones and sold them. And then the control population, she kept, she couldn't bring herself to kill the tame
It's
population.
like Scott of the Antarctic.
Yeah, eat that one first.
Yeah.
You're going to die anyway. Yeah.
But by 1999, only 100 tame females and 30 tame males were still alive.
99.
By 1999.
How old is Ludmilla at this stage? 104?
Let's guess. 63.
Jeez, you're good at this.
I know. She considered selling the pelts of some of the tame foxes. Eventually, she wrote an article for Scientific American talking about their work. And this is the first time the work really became famous in the West. She didn't quite ask for help, but the international scientific community responded. Letters flooded in and donations and enough money to keep the experiment going. And it continues to today. And they're still doing lots and lots of work in the fox farm here.
What's left to find?
Look, lots of things. Looking at understanding how domestication works, social intelligence, all sorts of things like that. Now, I'll just give you the wrap up for all the others. Lysenko held his post in the until the mid-1960s with the blessing of Khrushchev, but he was gradually denounced after Khrushchev ran out of power, or was dismissed. He was removed from his post in 1965 and restricted to an experimental farm in Moscow's Lenin Hills.
On which they did experiments on him?
No, they didn't.
Because he really didn't sound like he did an experiment in his life.
He certainly didn't. He just wrote up the results.
Yeah.
Throughout the Lysenkoist era, it's thought that 3,000 mainstream biologists were fired or sent to prison. Some number were executed.
Very ANU. Very ANU.
Including
There's a reason the director's leaving. I'm just saying.
There are a lot of people that say that Lysenko probably killed more people than any other individual scientist in history, directly and indirectly by starvation because of his bogus results. Dmitry Belyaev's older brother Nikolai and his wife Nina Petrovna and his 12-year-old son disappeared in 1937. 19 years later, so in 1956, the family finally found out what had happened to some of them.
Is this a happy ending, right?
No.
Would Pixar do this?
No, they wouldn't. I'll give you the happy ending in a bit.
Okay.
Nikolai, so he was the silkworm geneticist. He was shot on the 10th of November 1937, soon after he disappeared.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
For doing contraband science.
Oh, okay.
For non-Soviet science.
Non-Lysenkoism.
Okay.
Their mother searched for Nikolai's wife for years. Finally learned that she had been sent to prison without correspondence, which means you're not allowed to write and not allowed to tell, the gulags basically, near the city of Baysk. But she could never make contact with her or find news about what happened to her grandson. So we don't know what happened to the 12-year-old boy.
Leave him on high. Good on you.
The fox domestication experiment. I just want to remember that. It was born in a dark time. It was a dark time where Dmitry's goal was to get rid of Lysenkoism. And they achieved some great science. They showed some things that had been never shown before. But I think they did something else as well. They wanted to manufacture cuteness. I think they made a cute factory.
And then Japan took it and ran with it. Boom, job done.
I wanted to just leave you with a picture here of the adorable foxes that they made.
Over my shoulder too.
They made what I think
they're really cute.
Are amongst the cutest little animals that you can ever see.
Yeah, they're not ugly. And special surprise, we have 2 for people in this room.
If you just look under your seat.
Yeah, biggest sob story wins.
There you go. That's the story of Dmitry Belyaev and making the cute factory. There you go.
Quite a journey.
Who knew the Russians weren't all bad?
Yeah, they
were all bad. That's
From
terrible.
Darkness, cuteness.
Comes a puppy.
It's gonna need some work. But I can see where you're going with
Workshop
the catchphrase.
this. Work with me here.
Mum, where do puppies come from? Darkness. Darker the cuter. Who knew?
The more at risk of murder, the better.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's a lot of incentive to get bloody adorable bloody quickly, isn't it? You know? Like me or I'll kill you.
All right. Sources for that is an awesome book by Lee Allen Dugatkin and Ludmila Trot herself, which is How to Tame a Fox and Build a Dog. It's an awesome read. Tells a lot of this story and what they went through for this. Also at the start there is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, The Gulag Archipelago. There you go.
It's a great book.
Oh, you can supposedly have one as a pet. Not here in Australia. There are supposedly
I'll get you one.
People in Europe, throughout Russia and North America who have little domestic foxes as pets.
It's no more outrageous than having a Rottweiler or a Chihuahua.
No, but they're adorable, so I'd want one as well.
What you can actually do is you can go volunteer at the fox rescue shelter where they have baby foxes that were abandoned or their parent was hit by a car or something like that, and they can't release them or have them as pets because obviously foxes are terrible for
Australia.
But they're beautiful, and some of those changes you're talking about you see just through spending time with the foxes, so it doesn't even have to be a generational thing.
You're talking about those authentic Australian foxes that we have.
Yeah. Well, they can be very cute, and they start making funny noises, and they start wagging their tail, and they're very intelligent and lovely to spend time with.
Go and do that. Thank you so much, Hannah.
I did not know that.
That's an awesome piece of advice. This has been The Wholesome Show, brought to you today by the Research School of Biology and by Cute Foxes.
Yeah, that's lovely.
I've been Will Grant.
And the Soviet Union, let's not forget them, man.
And the Soviet Union.
They get a terrible rough trot of things.
You've been
Who have I been?
Rod
I've been many people.
Rod Lamberts. And thank you so much, Hannah Carl.
Thanks for having me,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks,
it's been
Hannah.
a pleasure.
Thank you.